The year was 1662, and England was a kingdom on the edge of uncertainty. The echoes of civil war had barely faded, and the monarchy, though restored, had yet to find its footing in the shadow of the turbulent years that had preceded it. Queen Mary, born to the throne amidst this fragile peace, would grow up under the weight of her royal bloodline's promises and the future she was destined to inherit. For Mary Stuart, daughter of King James II of England, her life would be defined not only by her place in the monarchy but also by the complicated balance of power between family loyalty, religion, and political unrest. As a young princess, Mary's world was shaped by the strictures of court life, her royal responsibilities, and the volatile relationship between her father and the people he ruled. Yet, in the shadows of palatial walls, away from the public eye, she was a woman with her own desires and dreams that would ultimately be tested in the crucible of political power, love, and loss. She was not the only one to face such trials. William of Orange, her cousin and future husband, was another figure caught between dynastic ambition and political necessity. A leader in his own right, William would come to England not as a conqueror, but as a partner, a king in his own right who would share the throne with Mary, but not without consequences. Their union, though one forged in political necessity, would come to define the course of history. The story of Mary II is one of power and betrayal, of sacrifice and love, set against the backdrop of the Glorious Revolution of 1688. It is a story of a woman caught between two worlds, the world of royal duty and family loyalty, and the world of a nation on the brink of monumental change. It is a story of a marriage that began as a political alliance, but grew into one of the most unlikely partnerships in the history of English monarchy. But for Mary, the price of power was high. Her reign, though brief, would leave an indelible mark on the course of history, shaping the future of the British monarchy and influencing the direction of the nation for generations to come. This is her story, a tale of a queen who ruled beside her husband, of the revolution that marked the end of one era and the beginning of another, and of a woman whose strength and resilience in the face of personal and political turmoil left an enduring legacy. Mary Stuart was born into a world of immense privilege and endless constraints. The year was 1662, and the crown of England, though restored under her father, King James II, had yet to find its full stability. It was a time when the echoes of civil war and rebellion were still fresh, when royal bloodlines were both a privilege and a curse. Born as the daughter of the king, Mary's life had been mapped out from the very beginning, an unbreakable chain of duty, lineage, and destiny. But within this framework, she would have to carve out a path of her own. It would be a path shaped by family loyalty, the demands of her throne, and the deepening political intrigue at the heart of the English court. As a child, Mary was no stranger to the whispers of history. Her mother, and Hyde, had been the daughter of a prominent English nobleman. But Anne's early death when Mary was still very young left her without a maternal figure to guide her through the intricacies of court life. It was her father, King James II, who took it upon himself to raise her. In many ways, this early period of her life was one of relative isolation. James, deeply focused on his own troubled reign and the growing tensions between Catholics and Protestants in England, kept his daughter close, but at a distance from the more dangerous intrigues of the royal court. Mary was educated with the mind of a future queen in mind. Her tutors were the finest that England could offer, and she learned the intricacies of politics, history, literature, and religion, but there was always the undercurrent of something more, a knowledge that her destiny was not entirely in her own hands. As the daughter of James II, she was an heir to the throne, a princess in a world that still clung to royal bloodlines as both a symbol of power and a fragile promise of stability. Growing up in the royal court was a complex experience for Mary. She was surrounded by grand celebrations, sumptuous banquets, and the finest art and music of her time. But there was always an underlying tension. Her father's reign was constantly under threat. James II, like his predecessors, faced fierce opposition from Parliament, the nobles, and the growing strength of Protestant factions. His attempts to promote Catholicism, especially in a country that had become staunchly Protestant following the Reformation, were seen as a direct challenge to the established order. This unease hung in the air, palpable even to the young Mary, as she looked to her father for guidance. Yet, it was not just the politics of religion that shaped Mary's early life. She was also keenly aware of the weight of her bloodline. The Stuart family, despite its royal status, was marked by tragedy. Her uncle, Charles I, had been executed in 1649 after a bitter civil war, and the monarchy had been exiled for a time. When her father, James II, ascended to the throne in 1685, it was under the shadow of that tumultuous past. James was a man determined to restore Catholicism to England, but his actions were often seen as tyrannical, alienating many of his subjects and causing divisions within his own family. From an early age, Mary was well versed in these political tensions. She heard whispered stories about the fall of her uncle, Charles I, and how his tragic end had left the monarchy vulnerable. And she learned that her father's attempts to reassert Catholicism in a Protestant country would not go unchallenged. Yet, for all the talk of revolution and rebellion, Mary remained a dutiful daughter. She loved her father, admired his steadfastness, and believed in his right to rule. However, she also understood that the world she lived in was fraught with danger, both for her family and for the monarchy itself. Her early education was not limited to the traditional subjects of royal children. The world of religion was just as important, as her father's Catholicism was one of the central pillars of his reign. Catholicism, however, was not universally accepted in England. The memory of the Protestant Reformation, the English Civil War, and the execution of Charles I still loomed large. For Mary, the tension between her family's Catholicism and the Protestant establishment was a part of her identity. She was raised with a sense of duty to her father's cause, but also a growing awareness that her position was precarious. The political landscape around her was constantly shifting. As Mary matured, so too did the complexity of her world. She began to understand the delicate balance of power that defined the royal court. Her father's reign was under constant scrutiny, and the growing whispers of rebellion against James's Catholic policies made Mary anxious. The people's distrust of Catholicism was ever present, and it was clear that her father's insistence on favoring Catholics in important government positions was slowly eroding his support. It was in this atmosphere of political uncertainty that Mary first met William of Orange, the man who would become her husband. William, a prince from the Netherlands, had a claim to the English throne through his mother, Mary, the daughter of Charles I. Their meeting, however, was not the beginning of a love story, but rather a political arrangement, a marriage that would eventually unite two powerful families and strengthen William's claim to the English throne. First, Mary found the prospect of marriage to William an unpleasant one. The union was not one of romance but one of necessity. William, though a powerful leader in his own right, was a foreign prince, and his claim to the English throne was still tenuous. The marriage to Mary would solidify his position and provide him with a strong political ally. For Mary, this meant that her own destiny was intertwined with his. Regardless of her personal feelings, the wedding took place in 1677, a union forged more by diplomacy than by affection. The two were married in a ceremony that, though grand, was clouded by the knowledge that it was a marriage of power, not love. Despite the lack of personal connection, Mary and William maintained a cordial relationship over the years. Their marriage, though arranged, would lay the groundwork for the extraordinary partnership that would come to define their reign. Over time, Mary came to understand that her marriage was not just a political alliance. It was also a lifeline for her family and for the English crown. William, though not English by birth, had a clear vision of the monarchy's future. His Protestant faith and political acumen made him a natural leader in the English court, and he quickly became a figurehead for the Protestant cause. Mary, for her part, had always believed in the importance of her family's legacy, but she also knew that to secure the future of the monarchy, her loyalty must extend beyond her own bloodline. As the years passed, tensions continued to rise between her father's Catholic policies and the Protestant majority in England. Mary's personal dilemma became more pressing with each passing day. While her loyalty to her father remained unwavering, she could see that his reign was faltering. The political and religious divisions were growing wider, and the likelihood of rebellion seemed ever more probable. It was in this volatile environment that Mary would face one of the most difficult decisions of her life. The year was 1677, as Mary Stuart's wedding to William of Orange loomed large on the horizon. A mixture of anticipation and political strategy filled the air. For the young princess, the marriage was an inevitable union, a duty, a sacrifice. She was but 20 years old, a woman caught between the traditions of her royal lineage and the ever-growing forces of change that would ultimately define her reign. William, now in his late 20s, had become a respected and astute leader. His position was strengthened by his role as the leader of the Dutch Republic, a Protestant nation that stood as a bulwark against the growing influence of Catholic monarchies in Europe, including France, where Louis XIV reigned supreme. For William, the marriage to Mary Stuart was not merely a personal affair. It was a political alliance with the English throne that would bolster his ambitions. Mary's feelings about the union were complex. While she had learned to accept the necessity of the match, there was a part of her that feared what lay ahead. Her duty as a royal princess had been ingrained in her since birth. She had always known that one day she would marry for the sake of political stability and family legacy. But the idea of sharing her life with a foreign prince, a man she barely knew, left her with a sense of unease. She was deeply attached to her home, her family, and the kingdom she had grown up in. Yet, she understood that her duty to England and to her father's Catholic reign was something she could not easily disregard. The wedding ceremony was grand, held in the Palace of Whitehall, the beating heart of England's political and royal life. The marriage was not just the joining of two people. It was the intertwining of two royal houses with histories of political strife and struggle. It was a moment steeped in symbolism, representing the potential for a new political order. To outsiders, it appeared to be a union that could bring unity to a deeply divided kingdom. But to those within the royal court, it was clear that tensions were far from over. On the surface, William and Mary seemed to form a harmonious alliance. The ceremony itself was marked by a formal and restrained air, two royal figures, representing the Protestant and Catholic worlds, coming together for the good of their respective nations. William, a stoic and calculating figure, quickly adapted to the ways of the English court. His political acumen was unmatched, and he knew how to navigate the complex relationships between the English nobility, the Catholic establishment, and the growing Protestant factions. Mary, on the other hand, though dutiful, was still adjusting to the weight of her new life. Her own internal conflict, torn between her devotion to her Catholic father and the Protestant prince she had just married, was never far from the surface. Over the next few years, the couple's relationship began to deepen, though not without strain. Mary and William came from two different worlds. While Mary had been raised in the luxurious, yet politically fraught, English court, William had been raised in the cold, strategic world of the Dutch Republic, a nation constantly at war with the mighty power of France. Despite their differences, the two began to work together. William's cool and calculated nature complemented Mary's warmth and devotion to her family. Slowly, the political necessity of their marriage was balanced by a growing mutual respect. But outside their personal lives, England was changing rapidly. King James II's reign had been marked by deep political divisions. His strong Catholic sympathies had alienated much of the Protestant establishment. and his attempts to promote Catholicism were seen by many as a direct challenge to the Protestant legacy of England. James, however, had not been entirely blind to the growing discontent among his subjects. He had sought to ease tensions by promoting some Protestant rights and by appointing Protestants to key positions within the government. But these gestures did little to quell the unrest among his people. The nation was split, Catholic versus Protestant, monarchy versus parliament, loyalists versus rebels. For Mary, the situation was becoming increasingly difficult. She was loyal to her father, King James II, but she also understood that his policies were pushing the kingdom to the brink of rebellion. The political climate was tense, and whispers of revolt filled the air. In this environment, Mary found herself at a crossroads. Her father's Catholicism was her birthright, yet her husband, William, stood as a symbol of Protestantism, a figurehead for those who opposed the king's policies. Her loyalty to William was tested in every conversation, every decision. Meanwhile, William's ambitions were growing. Though he had no official claim to the English throne, he knew that his marriage to Mary strengthened his position. His cause was not just one of personal gain, but of political necessity. Europe's balance of power was fragile, and William believed that England, under a Protestant monarch, could serve as a bulwark against the rising tide of Catholic dominance in Europe, particularly from France, which under Louis XIV's rule, sought to expand its influence. William had long been an enemy of Louis XIV, whose ambition for European dominance had already led to several wars with the Dutch. The marriage to Mary, then, was not just a personal one, it was part of a broader geopolitical strategy. But while Mary understood this, it did not make her position any easier. She was caught between the man she loved, her father, and the kingdom she was destined to rule. The political pressures mounted over the years. In 1685, King James II took the throne after the death of his brother, Charles II. James's reign, however, was immediately contested. His attempt to reintroduce Catholicism into England led to a series of conflicts, both with Parliament and with the Church of England. The king's appointment of Catholics to high offices was seen as an affront to the established Protestant hierarchy, and many within the nation began to fear that James was undermining the traditional English constitution. For Mary, this period was fraught with emotional turmoil. She had grown up under the protection of her father's reign, but she now saw the cracks in the monarchy. The king's actions were pushing the country toward open rebellion, yet she felt powerless to change the course of events. Her marriage to William, Protestant, placed her in a difficult position. The political tensions between England and the Netherlands only deepened, and it seemed that war between the two might be inevitable. As William watched from the outside, he knew that the political situation in England was rapidly deteriorating. He could not remain silent as the country slid closer to rebellion. In 1688, William made the fateful decision to invade England. He had the support of a number of English nobles who were dissatisfied with James's rule and were eager to see a change in leadership. For these nobles, William represented hope, a chance to restore England to Protestantism and to challenge the growing power of Catholicism. When William landed in England in November 1688, it was the beginning of what would later be called the Glorious Revolution. James, unable to rally his troops in time, was forced to flee the country. In his place, William and Mary were declared joint monarchs of England. The transition of power was almost bloodless, earning the event its name. But for Mary, this was a time of profound emotional complexity. She had watched as her father, King James, was dethroned and forced into exile. The country had chosen William as its leader, but Mary's heart was torn between her loyalty to her father and her duty to the crown. The year 1689 marked the dawn of a new era for England, but for Mary II, it was a year filled with paradoxes. As she and her husband, William of Orange, ascended to the throne, the country was rife with the echoes of division, unrest, and political upheaval. The Glorious Revolution, which had seen King James II deposed in favor of the Protestant William, was a victory. Yes, but it came at a tremendous cost. Mary, caught between her father's exiled Catholic legacy and the responsibilities of her newfound Protestant monarchy, was no stranger to the internal conflict that arose from this dramatic shift in power. For William, the political landscape of England was far from secure. Though he had enjoyed support from a significant portion of the nobility, the monarchy was anything but stable. William, whose leadership in the Dutch Republic had earned him a reputation as a pragmatic strategist, quickly realized that his new role required more than military prowess. It demanded an intricate balancing of power between the monarchy, parliament, and the various factions within England's religious and political spheres. As an outsider, his position was precarious. To solidify his authority, he knew he needed more than just military might. He needed to secure the trust of his people, particularly those who had opposed his invasion just a few months earlier. For Mary, the political drama of the revolution was not just about survival. It was about redefining her role in a kingdom that was reshaping itself before her eyes. Though she had been declared queen alongside William, she was still very much a woman navigating the deeply male-dominated world of royal politics. Her personal loyalties remained torn. She had long been loyal to her father, King James, and his Catholic cause. Yet she had been thrust into the political maelstrom of Protestant England. She could no longer afford the luxury of personal sentiment. The nation needed her to be a queen first and a daughter second. William, ever the calculated tactician, recognized this tension in Mary. He knew that she had been forced into this position, that her acceptance of the throne was, in many ways, not her choice. In the years to come, their relationship would be tested not just by political forces, but by the undercurrents of personal resentment, loyalty, and a shared sense of responsibility. As they worked together to stabilize their reign, it was clear that their union, though strong, would never be free from the weight of Mary's complex feelings. Despite the challenges, the first years of their reign were marked by a determined effort to bring peace to a fractured nation. The initial period after their ascension was filled with triumphs, but also deep struggles, as they navigated the difficult task of consolidating power while managing the lingering divisions of the nation. In 1689, the English Bill of Rights was passed, a landmark piece of legislation that sought to limit the powers of the monarchy and solidify the power of Parliament. This document, while an important step forward for the balance of power in England, also highlighted the shifting political dynamics that Mary and William now had to navigate. The Bill of Rights, passed in December of 1689, laid down the foundation for constitutional monarchy in England. It ensured that Parliament had the final say on matters of taxation and military matters and reinforced the Protestant nature of the monarchy. While this was a victory for William, who had long been a champion of Protestantism, it was a bitter pill for Mary to swallow. For her, the bill represented a definitive break from the past, a definitive break from her father, King James, who had ruled as an absolute monarch. Though she knew that this was necessary for the stability of the realm, it was a stark reminder of how far she had come from the world she had once known. The passage of the Bill of Rights also brought a new wave of challenges for the young monarchs. For one, the fact that Parliament had limited the monarch's powers was seen by many as an infringement on the rights of the crown. For William, this was a political victory, securing the throne for his Protestant cause, but it also meant that he had to balance the demands of Parliament with his own political ambitions. Over time, this tension would become one of the defining features of his reign. As the political landscape continued to shift, the couple also faced challenges in their personal lives. Though William had long been an ambitious leader, his relationship with Mary was complex. Their union, which had been forged in the fires of political necessity, was not without its strains. The couple's differences, particularly in terms of character and temperament, were becoming more pronounced as time went on. William, a man of action and strategic thinking, was often distant and unemotional, focused on the broader picture of his reign. Mary, by contrast, had always been more emotionally driven and compassionate, struggling to reconcile her personal feelings with the demands of her role as queen. In many ways, Mary found herself living in the shadow of William's formidable personality. His political acumen and military prowess had brought him to the throne, but it was clear that he was not entirely comfortable in the role of king. He had achieved his goal, but at great personal cost. William's deep-seated fear of assassination and political conspiracy often kept him distant from others, including his wife. Mary, for her part, was often left to manage the court on her own, carrying out many of the duties of a monarch while William focused on foreign policy and military affairs. While the royal couple faced personal and political challenges, the situation in England itself was hardly stable. Despite the initial success of the Glorious Revolution, there were still many in the country who remained loyal to King James II and his Catholic cause. The Jacobites, as they were known, continued to rally against William and Mary's reign, leading to a series of uprisings and rebellions throughout England, Scotland, and Ireland. In Ireland, James II had the support of many Catholics, and his army staged a dramatic return to the island in 1689, hoping to reclaim the throne for the Stuart dynasty. The ensuing conflict, known as the Williamite War, would prove to be one of the most challenging periods of William and Mary's reign. The war would come to a head at the Battle of the Boyne in 1690, where William led a decisive victory over James II's forces. The battle, though a clear military triumph, would also mark a turning point in the relationship between Mary and William. Though Mary had remained supportive of her husband's military campaign, her heart was torn between the demands of the crown and her lingering loyalties to her father. The victory at Boyne would solidify William's position as the unchallenged ruler of England, but it would also deepen the divide between him and Mary. For Mary, the years following the Glorious Revolution were not just about political and military victories. They were about finding her place in a rapidly changing world. The early years of her reign were marked by a sense of uncertainty, as she tried to navigate the complex politics of a divided nation while maintaining her own personal integrity. Her devotion to her father's Catholic cause, though tempered by her duty as queen, continued to weigh heavily on her heart. But Mary was not one to remain passive in the face of adversity. As the years passed, she grew into her role as queen, finding strength in her own abilities and in her partnership with William. Though their relationship was not without its difficulties, it was clear that, together, they had managed to stabilize the nation and steer England into a new political era. For Mary, the Glorious Revolution had marked the beginning of her reign, but it had also been a journey of self-discovery, a process of reconciling the past with the future. The years that followed the Glorious Revolution were not without their cost. And for Mary II, the challenges of being queen, both in the public eye and within the private chambers of the royal palace, became increasingly complex. As she navigated the complexities of shared power with William and sought to solidify her rule, the personal toll of the monarchy weighed heavily upon her. This section of their reign would be defined not just by the political and military challenges of the age, but by the enduring question of legacy, their legacy, and the legacy of the monarchy they were building. By the early 1690s, England had begun to settle into a relatively stable political environment after the turbulence of the 1688 revolution. The most pressing challenges for the monarchy, however, were not just from external threats or rival factions, but from the very nature of the government they were now attempting to rule. William's victory over James II had been decisive, but many of the kingdom's core problems were not so easily solved. The English throne, still bearing the scars of civil war, revolution, and religious discord, demanded more than just military victories. It needed a ruling vision, one that would combine the necessity of Protestant unity with the desires of a kingdom that was exhausted by years of conflict. In the first few years following their ascension, Mary and William faced the daunting task of reconciling their Protestant supporters with the needs of the rest of England, Catholics and Loyalists alike. The tensions between the two sides were never far from the surface, and the lingering threat of a Catholic restoration in Europe continued to cast its long shadow over England, while William focused his energy on the continental wars, especially in his capacity as the leader of the League of Augsburg against the expansionist ambitions of Louis XIV of France. Mary took on a quieter but no less crucial role in managing the domestic affairs of the kingdom. Her task was complicated by the fact that, while she shared power with William, England was still, in many ways, a male-dominated monarchy. William's political acumen and military leadership often overshadowed Mary's contributions. And though she was crowned as joint monarch, many in England saw her as merely a figurehead, a queen consort to William's more assertive reign. Yet in many ways, it was Mary's steady, if often unnoticed, governance that helped maintain the fragile peace at home. She worked diligently on diplomatic correspondence, hosted visiting ambassadors, and navigated the complex web of Parliament, always maintaining her own delicate balance between the desire to govern and the awareness of the power she did not fully wield. The tension between Mary and William, however, was not just a matter of political disagreement. Their marriage, although one of necessity at the outset, was built on years of political maneuvering and an increasingly complex partnership. The early years of their reign had been marked by relative peace, but as time passed, it became clear that their marriage was not without its personal and emotional complexities. Mary, always somewhat introspective and often weary of her public duties, found herself increasingly isolated in her royal role. Her love for her husband, though genuine, was tempered by the realization that their marriage was more political alliance than romantic partnership. William, with his single-minded focus on the affairs of Europe and his distant, often aloof demeanor, left Mary to shoulder the emotional burdens of kingship, even as she struggled with the personal cost of her royal obligations. Yet, despite the strain in their marriage, they continued to present a united front, at least outwardly. Their relationship, characterized by a mutual respect for each other's capabilities, was one of pragmatic cooperation. William often deferred to Mary on matters of court etiquette and internal governance, while Mary, in turn, supported her husband's military endeavors. Still, there was an undeniable distance between them, one that was marked by silence as much as by words. Mary's role, although crucial to the survival of the monarchy, remained difficult for her to navigate emotionally. At times, she had to suppress her own desires for a quieter life, her personal grief over her father's exile, and her weariness of the pressures of being queen. Her loyalty to her father, James II, remained a source of conflict throughout her reign. Though her duty as Queen of Protestant England was clear, her love for her father, the Catholic king who had once ruled over her and whom she had always admired, remained a deeply private anguish. In 1691, Mary's personal grief was compounded by the death of her only surviving sibling, who had suffered from long-standing health issues. Anne's death hit Mary hard, deepening her sense of isolation in a world that seemed to be constantly changing around her. Although Anne had been a rival for the throne at one point, the two sisters had been close in their youth, and Anne's passing left a void that Mary could not easily fill. Meanwhile, the state of England itself remained precarious. The Williamite War in Ireland had ended in 1691 with the Treaty of Limerick, which had effectively ended the hopes of James II's return to the throne. However, the political climate was still far from stable. The War of the Grand Alliance, which had drawn England into a broader European conflict against France, loomed large. William's military ambitions were focused on the continent, but Mary, whose health had already begun to deteriorate, could only play a secondary role in the larger strategies of warfare. She was forced to watch as William's priorities continued to focus on the international stage, leaving her to deal with the internal politics of the kingdom, a task that, while important, was emotionally draining for her. As her health worsened, so did her sense of alienation from the duties of royalty. Her relationship with William, though based on mutual respect, had become more strained with time, She could no longer hide the toll that her position had taken on her. She had come to see her role less as a partner in the monarchy and more as a caretaker of a fragile kingdom that required constant vigilance. But there were moments when the personal weight of her role became overwhelming, and Mary would retreat into her private chambers, seeking solace in the quiet moments when she was free from the expectations of her position. The couple's relationship would be further tested by the tensions that arose within the royal court. The factions within the English court were numerous and varied, with different power centers vying for influence. William, always distrustful of the court, found himself at odds with several of the nobles who had supported him during the Revolution. Mary, on the other hand, found herself caught between the factions, attempting to mediate where possible but often finding herself unable to satisfy all parties. It was in these years, as the 1690s unfolded, that the first signs of the monarch's greatest trial began to appear. For Mary, the shadow of death loomed ever closer. Although her reign had been relatively successful in terms of consolidating power and securing the Protestant succession, it had come at a great personal cost. Her emotional health, frail from the demands of the crown, had begun to deteriorate. In 1694, as the couple prepared for yet another European campaign, Mary fell seriously ill. Her final illness was swift, and although William was by her side, there was little that could be done. The death of Mary II on December 28, 1694, marked the end of a crucial era in English history. Though William remained on the throne, the loss of his wife left a profound mark on both him and the kingdom. Her death would cast a shadow over the rest of his reign, and for many, it marked the end of an era of relative stability. Mary's legacy, although overshadowed by her husband's larger political achievements, would endure. She had been a stabilizing force during the early years of their reign, a queen who had navigated the treacherous waters of both politics and personal sorrow with grace. But her true legacy would always be tied to the profound sacrifices she had made for the crown and the nation she had once ruled with her husband. The death of Mary II left a void that could never be filled, not just in the royal household but in the hearts of the English people. Her reign, though short, was marked by resilience, wisdom, and an unwavering sense of duty. And though her husband, William III, continued to rule, his reign would never be the same without her by his side. Her absence cast a long shadow, and the course of English history shifted once again in the wake of her death. William, who had always been a man driven by the demands of power, found himself momentarily adrift. He had lost not just a queen but a partner, confidant, and, in many ways, his moral compass. The grief that William experienced after Mary's passing was immense, and although he continued to lead England, it was clear that the monarchy had been irrevocably altered. There was no longer a shared vision between him and his late wife. No more discussions of governance in the quiet hours of the night. The person who had grounded him, who had reminded him of the balance between duty and personal sacrifice, was gone. The court, too, felt the absence of Mary. Her presence had been the steadying force behind the monarchy, and without her, the royal palace seemed empty. The courtiers who had once followed her lead, looking to her for guidance on matters of protocol and diplomacy, now found themselves without a clear direction. Many sought solace in the stability of William's military leadership, while others quietly mourned the loss of the queen they had come to respect and admire. But William, though deeply affected by his wife's death, had no choice but to press forward. He turned his attention once again to the wars on the continent, most notably the ongoing conflict with France. The War of the Grand Alliance, which had begun during the early years of his reign, showed no signs of slowing, and William knew that his kingdom depended on him. Still, there were moments, those quiet, solitary moments in his chambers, when he would think of Mary, and the weight of her absence would become almost unbearable. In the months that followed Mary's death, William's grief slowly morphed into determination. He continued to rule England with an iron hand, but the personal toll of his wife's passing remained with him, evident in his increasingly solitary demeanor. He had always been a reserved man, but now, more than ever, he withdrew from those around him, perhaps fearing the vulnerability of emotions he could not control. As the years passed, England slowly adjusted to the absence of their queen. Though Mary had been deeply beloved by many, her death did not cause the collapse of the monarchy that some had feared. William, though without the partner he had once shared his crown with, was still an effective ruler. His leadership on the battlefield earned him respect both abroad and at home. And while the English court lost its maternal figure, it found a new sense of direction under his leadership. However, despite his successes, William's own health began to deteriorate. In 1702, after years of relentless campaigning and the strain of ruling both England and the broader European theater of war, William III succumbed to illness. His death, though not unexpected, marked the end of an era. The crown passed to his sister-in-law, Mary's younger sister, who would go on to rule England in her own right. Yet, for many, it was as though a chapter had closed in the kingdom, one that would never be fully reopened. Mary II's legacy, however, would endure in the hearts of the English people, not through grand gestures or monumental political change, but through her quiet grace, her devotion to the crown, and her steady hand in a time of great political and religious upheaval. Though she had not been a fiery revolutionary or a conqueror on the battlefield, her reign had been one of stability, a stabilizing force in a kingdom torn by divisions and the threat of foreign invasion. Her legacy was one of dignity, resilience, and sacrifice. As England moved into the 18th century, the memory of Mary II lingered in the national consciousness. She was remembered as a queen who had balanced the delicate act of ruling a nation with the personal sacrifice that monarchy demanded. In the years that followed, she became a symbol of the strength and wisdom required to navigate the complexities of royal duty. The transition of power from William II marked the continuation of the monarchy. But it was clear that the monarchy itself had changed forever. Though a capable and intelligent ruler in her own right, could not fill the void left by her sister's death. The relationship between William and Mary had been one of mutual respect. And though their marriage had been fraught with challenges, they had been united in their vision for England. Anne's reign, while successful, would always carry the weight of comparison to the partnership that had existed between William and Mary. For the people of England, Mary's death was a reminder that monarchy was not just about power or lineage, but about the personal sacrifices of those who wore the crown. Mary had given up her own desires, her own peace, and, ultimately, her life for the sake of the kingdom, and in doing so, she had earned the respect of the nation and the admiration of those who had known her most intimately. In the years to come, historians would look back on her life and reign, recognizing the unique role she had played in the shaping of England's history. While she may have been overshadowed by her husband's military successes and her sister's later reign, Mary II had quietly ensured the survival of a monarchy that might otherwise have faltered. Her reign had been one of wisdom and moderation, and in her, the English people had found not just a queen, but a figure who had embodied the ideals of grace and duty. Her death, though tragic, did not mark the end of her influence. It marked the beginning of a new era, one where the monarchy would continue to evolve and change, shaped in no small part by the sacrifices of Mary II. As the people of England moved into the 18th century, they carried with them the memory of the queen who had ruled with both strength and tenderness, and whose legacy would continue to shape the nation for generations to come.